Some experts are saying the increases could come as a result of the new reciprocal tariffs put in place yesterday by President Trump. So what does all of this mean for our local beef, cattle, and pork farmers? Mark Livermore breaks that down.
The U.S. beef industry leaders are confident long-standing Chinese restrictions on imports of U.S. beef will be lifted. China is concerned about the safety of U.S. beef since the mad cow disease broke out in 2003.
Just minutes ago, breaking news rocked the agricultural world. China has officially rejected 150,000 tons of U.S. beef, and overnight, Russia swooped in to claim a massive $1.2 billion market share. This isn't just a trade headline. This is an earthquake for American farmers, ranchers, and the entire U.S. beef industry, an industry worth over $78 billion annually. And tonight, we're breaking it all down: the politics, the economics, the human cost, and the global game of food power. If you're watching this right now, don't forget to hit that like button to support the channel. And of course, subscribe to stay updated on the biggest stories shaping our world. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what's happening next. Now, let's set the stage. The U.S. beef industry has always been more than just burgers, steaks, and barbecue. It's a symbol of American pride. From Texas ranchers to Midwest feedlots, beef represents not only a livelihood for hundreds of thousands of families, but also a crucial piece of America's export economy. In 2023, the U.S. exported over $11 billion in beef, with China ranking as one of the fastest-growing markets. Just a few years ago, after long trade negotiations, China opened its doors wider to American beef, giving U.S. producers a chance to feed one of the largest and hungriest consumer bases on Earth. But that opportunity has now been slammed shut. Why? Because of a toxic mix of mad cow disease scares, tariffs, and mounting political tension. Beijing claims food safety concerns, but experts are clear. This isn't just about health, it's about leverage. It's about using agriculture as a weapon in a geopolitical chess game between Washington and Beijing. Think about it. 150,000 tons of beef, gone. That's not a small number. That's millions of cattle, thousands of workers, and billions of dollars in lost revenue. To put it in perspective, that's enough beef to supply a city the size of Los Angeles for months. And who benefits from this massive rejection? Russia. Within hours, Moscow moved to fill the gap, locking in deals worth over $1.2 billion to supply beef that would have gone to China. In other words, America's loss is Russia's gain, and fast. This is where the story gets fascinating, because it's not just about trade, it's about confidence. The U.S. beef industry leaders have long been confident in their product, often boasting about unmatched quality, food safety standards, and global demand. But now, that confidence is being tested like never before. Can American beef survive being shut out of one of its biggest growth markets? Let's take a step back and look at the foundation of the industry. The U.S. beef industry employs over 700,000 people directly and supports more than 1.4 million jobs indirectly, from truck drivers to meat packers to grocery chains. Ranchers in states like Texas, Nebraska, and Kansas depend on exports for profitability. Without access to markets like China, the surplus of beef in the U.S. could drive prices down at home, leaving farmers with thinner margins, or worse, bankruptcy. And it's not just about economics, it's about politics too. Farmers and ranchers are a critical voting bloc in America, especially in swing states. When they feel squeezed, they make noise, and that noise reaches Washington. But here's the twist. While China slams the door, Russia and other global players are opening theirs. Moscow is seizing the moment to boost its agricultural exports, not only to China but also across Asia, under the Belt and Road Initiative. Brazil and Australia are also circling, eager to expand their beef trade into markets once dominated by the U.S. And here's the kicker. Many of these countries are starting to move away from U.S. dollars in trade deals, instead using local currencies like the yuan or ruble. This isn't just about beef anymore. It's about the future of global trade and the slow, steady decoupling from America's economic dominance. Now, imagine the impact on the ground here at home. Families in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, families who've been raising cattle for generations, suddenly see contracts evaporate. They face layoffs at processing plants. Trucking companies lose business. Rural towns already struggling with population decline and weak infrastructure suddenly face another blow. This isn't just a story about beef exports. This is a story about the survival of the American heartland. And yet, the response from U.S. leadership has been muted, almost defensive. Officials talk about negotiating, about safety standards, about finding new markets. But let's be honest, there are no markets as big as China. Losing access to 1.4 billion hungry people isn't something you can just patch up overnight. The real question is this: was this preventable? Did U.S. trade policy, especially the endless tariff wars and confrontational stance with China, push Beijing into making this move? Some experts say yes. They argue that agriculture has become the frontline casualty of political fights that should have been resolved diplomatically. But others warn that this is just the beginning, that China is intentionally targeting industries like beef and soybeans to inflict pain in states that politically matter most to Washington. In other words, it's not random, it's calculated. And when you see Russia stepping in so quickly, it's clear that this isn't just about food, it's about realignment. And here's where it gets chilling. This might not stop with beef. Already, whispers are emerging about possible restrictions on U.S. pork and poultry. If that happens, we're talking about a full-scale agricultural trade war, one that could reshape the entire U.S. food industry. So tonight, we're going to break it all down. We'll hear from industry leaders, we'll dive into the numbers, we'll explore how Russia and other countries are stepping in, and we'll ask the question, what does this mean for America's future? Because if beef is just the beginning, then the story unfolding right now could define the next decade of global food supply and international politics. Before we go deeper, if you find this content useful, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you these stories and build a community that cares about the future of not just America, but the world. Beijing points to food safety, specifically concerns around bovine spongiform encephalopathy, better known as mad cow disease. For decades, mad cow disease has haunted the global beef trade. Even a single confirmed case in cattle can send shockwaves through export markets, leading to bans, restrictions, and consumer panic. And recently, a handful of older cattle in the U.S. tested positive for atypical strains of the disease. American regulators downplayed the risk, pointing out that these cases were isolated, rare, and not a danger to the public. But Beijing wasn't buying it. They seized on the reports as a justification to halt imports, claiming they were acting in the interest of consumer safety. But here's the kicker. Experts believe this is less about safety and more about strategy. Dr. Alan Matthews, a trade analyst at the University of Dublin, put it bluntly. China often uses health concerns as a political tool. They can restrict imports overnight, then loosen them when it suits their economic or diplomatic goals. And let's be honest, the timing couldn't be more political. Just weeks ago, Washington doubled down on tariffs targeting Chinese goods, from semiconductors to solar panels. Beijing's rejection of 150,000 tons of U.S. beef looks a lot less like a coincidence and a lot more like retaliation. Tariffs have been the thorn in America's side for years now, and agriculture always seems to take the biggest hit. Remember soybeans? Back in 2018 and 2019, China slashed U.S. soybean imports as part of the tariff war. Iowa farmers were left holding massive stockpiles with nowhere to sell. Billions in government bailouts had to be handed out to keep farmers afloat. Well, this beef crisis feels like soybeans all over again. Only this time the stakes are even higher because the cattle industry doesn't just feed exports, it drives the domestic meat supply chain too. So, what are the experts saying now? Ranchers and beef producers across the Midwest are sounding the alarm. Tom Vilsack, former U.S. Agriculture Secretary, warned in a recent panel, if the U.S. doesn't resolve its trade conflict with China quickly, we risk losing our foothold in Asia permanently. Once those markets shift to Russia, Brazil, or Australia, it's incredibly hard to win them back. And that's exactly what's happening. Let's talk numbers. In 2022, China imported $12 billion worth of beef overall. Roughly $2.1 billion of that came from the U.S. Now, with 150,000 tons rejected, that gap is wide open. Russia swooped in first with a $1.2 billion deal, but Brazil is lining up too. In fact, Brazil already supplies over 40% of China's imported beef, and they're eager to push that number even higher. Australia, which has been rebuilding ties with Beijing after years of tension, is also in prime position to benefit. This raises a painful question for U.S. producers. If Russia, Brazil, and Australia cement long-term supply deals with China, does the U.S. ever get back in? Many analysts say no. Once China shifts its supply chains, it prefers consistency. And that consistency might mean America is permanently sidelined. Let's bring in the human angle. Imagine being a cattle rancher in Nebraska. You've invested years building up your herd, securing contracts, and relying on steady exports to keep your ranch profitable. Then, overnight, you hear that your beef isn't wanted in China anymore. That means oversupply at home, falling prices, and potential layoffs at nearby meatpacking plants. Workers lose jobs, families lose income, and entire rural towns start to wither. This isn't hypothetical. It's already happening. Ranchers in Texas and Kansas have reported canceled orders. Small family-run feedlots are warning they might shut down within months if they can't move their cattle. And local economies that depend on the industry are bracing for impact. Remember, agriculture doesn't exist in a bubble. When beef exports collapse, it hits trucking companies, feed suppliers, processing plants, and even restaurants. And that brings us full circle. What started as a rejection of U.S. beef in China is now reshaping global trade, hitting American ranchers hard and redrawing the lines of power between Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and beyond. This isn't just about cattle or exports. It's about livelihoods, small towns, and the future of America's role in the world economy. The ripple effects are already here, and the choices made in the next few months will decide whether U.S. farmers can survive this storm or if rivals permanently take over America's markets. So I'll leave you with this question. Is the U.S. ready to adapt, or is it risking long-term decline by refusing to compromise? Thank you for sticking with us through this deep dive. If you found this video useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps us grow. And for more hard-hitting analysis on global politics, trade, and the stories that affect your everyday life, make sure to hit subscribe and join the community here at Traveling Vibes. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, thanks for watching.